Good morning and welcome. On behalf of Interim Community Development Board and staff, I would like to welcome Mayor Durkan to the Donation Community Room in the Gordon Hirabayashi Place building. I would also like for us to remember that we are here today on Duwamish land and on Nihonmachi, Japantown. This building, the community room, and the ground we stand on are special and remind us of our mission to continue our fight for justice and equality. Gordon and Donnie both gave their lives to uphold the values of equality and justice for the community. It has been 50 years now since Interim CD embarked to address affordable housing in the CID and other neighborhoods. As we witness the immense threat of displacement to our low-income refugee and immigrant community that have called this neighborhood home for generations, we are even more committed to preserve and secure low-income affordable housing in the CID. I'm very thankful to Mayor Durkan for being here today to address this very important issue, and I look forward to positive actions as a result of this and other similar conversations to address this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Pradeepa, and for hosting us here today. I want to thank everyone who participated in this, which is one of a number of roundtables that I'll be having throughout the city to talk about the impacts of growth and displacement. The Chinatown International District has been at the center of Seattle's challenges for many decades. As we were reminded today, we are on native land, and the first and largest displacement was the indigenous people. And then we've seen come through this area, we had the laws that displaced the Chinese, and then we had the Japanese internment. We had Little Saigon being set up here. And we've seen, though, because this is the crux of downtown, with Sound Transit and everything out, some of the people who are most vulnerable sit at this crossroads in the city that we know we need to do more. I said in the State of the City address yesterday that we have to create a city of the future, and that means working together to protect community, to protect against gentrification and displacement as it happens. We need more affordable low-income and middle-income housing, because our region's skyrocketing costs and rents have displaced far too many individuals and families. Our communities of color have particularly been impacted by these challenges. The people standing behind me today represent a number of community-based organizations who've been on the front lines working with community for years trying to prevent the impacts of growth and displacement. But because of what we've seen happen in the city in these short years, that has accelerated at a rate that we must take immediate and urgent steps now. If we look at places like Rainier Beach and Beacon Hill and the Central District, those communities have changed so much in my lifetime, but more in the last 4 or 5 years. I was really fortunate to hear some great ideas today as we listen to what are those things we need to do first to address the impacts of growth, gentrification, and displacement. Everything from how do we provide culturally and linguistic support services to people? How do we make sure families can stay together and we have a range of housing available, not just market rate small apartments? We know we will continue to listen, but I am going to sign an executive order today that will do a number of things that we need to do right away. One, we will continue to invest in affordable housing. Since I took office, we have been able, with our partners, to announce over $700 million in affordable housing. That is a tremendous amount, and it's still not enough. But it means that we will be on track to create 3,600 new affordable homes for low-income families by 2022. But we know we have to do more. We have to find ways to build more affordable low-income housing and more middle-income housing, particularly housing for families. So the executive order I signed today will do a number of things. Number one, it will direct the Office of Housing to update several of our funding policies to further address displacement. Steps will include, number one, establishing a community preference policy to really encourage those developments that are city funded to give priority to those people in a community that would be displaced so that they can live in that new housing. We have to do this together with the developers on a case-by-case basis, but by creating this incentive and this policy in place, we want to make sure that those people who would be the first to be pushed out by redevelopment and growth can be first on the list for the housing that the city is investing in. We are going to build about 3,600 new affordable homes by 2022. If we are able to maximize those homes to really assist us in anti-gentrification and displacement, we can take a big step towards making sure community stays in place and people can live and work in the neighborhoods where they are. We also want to expand the home repair program. A lot of times people cannot stay in place because they can't afford to keep their own home repaired. We want to make that easier for homeowners to have those improvements and remain in place. We want to do all we can as a city to foster home ownership, particularly on publicly owned lands. I think many of you saw recent data that showed the huge disparity between communities of color and white communities in Seattle in terms of what their wealth is. And that wealth is often reflected in whether they can afford to own their own home. We have to come up with more strategies and more creative ways where people can have home ownership and get in place. So we're going to be looking at those strategies and seeing what the city can do. We also want to make sure that we help and assist in acquiring and preserving existing buildings that are providing affordable housing. You know, we will be passing MHA this year, and in MHA sometimes the incentive is to redevelop properties because that will create the incentive for developers. But what we don't want to do is lose all the affordable housing we have, so we want to have strategies in place to acquire and preserve existing affordable housing. In addition to this, we also will, you know, as I said, pass MHA. Hopefully that will give us more resources to build affordable housing. We're going to be looking to make changes to and strengthen the just cause eviction ordinance. We have seen reports, multiple reports in the last months about how many people are displaced because of eviction in this town. And that often is the triggering event that leads to homelessness. We want to make sure that we strengthen the just cause eviction ordinance. We also are working to renew the multifamily tax exemption. That's set to expire. We've been working with Frank Chop and others in Olympia to do that. My executive order asks us, we can't do it all alone, so we're also making sure that they continue working with the state legislature so they know that our priorities in this area are simple. Number one, the state needs to step up with more money for affordable housing. And I think there are some very promising tools to do that this year, but we can't scale it alone. Second, we have to have ways to be able to lower the property taxes of low-income seniors and others. And I heard a great today, maybe we can also have a deferment program in place so that people can afford to stay in place. We want to look at all of that because it's not just affordable housing that's important. I heard loud and clear today, and I've heard it in the past year, we have to also make sure there's affordable commercial space and affordable artistic space, and also for the support services and providers who are caring for people in many of these communities. The third thing that this executive order to do is we will continue to move forward on our equitable development initiative. As you know, my budget put in place a steady stream of income so we can continue to partner with communities and neighborhoods who are on the front lines of and know best what will empower their communities. I'm very proud to have been able to partner with the Filipino community. They're building an amazing project, but it's just a start. With the Ethiopian community, with Africatown, those projects reflect what we can do as a city to really put a stake in the ground to prevent displacement and gentrification and bring people back to the city. Finally, I've created an affordability and livability sub-cabinet. One of the things I heard loud and clear over the last year and again today is so many departments touch community in different ways that we really need to be more cohesive as a government, whatever we do, and particularly in this area, so many of our departments. So our anti-displacement work will be focused on sub-cabinet. They will have to come back to me by May with their first report and then meet quarterly so that we can make sure that we're doing all we can as a city to not have siloed efforts, but to really building synergies among everything that we do. I would like everyone to be here. Is Lisa here? Hey, how'd you sneak there? And now I'm really honored to have Lisa Herbold here, who snuck in behind me somehow, who has been, really a tireless voice for how do we balance the need to have density in Seattle with the need to make sure that we don't displace people and maintain that affordable housing. So with that, Councilmember Herbold, thank you so much for being here.
Greetings. Thank you so much for including me. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. I want to first thank the community members in Chinatown International District. It was they, as well as members of the Yesler Collaborative, when we were looking at passing MHA in the CID, as well as passing MHA in the 23rd Avenue nodes, that actually came to the City Council and said, hey, we want to look at community preference policies. We need to be able to do this. And so the Council passed Resolution 31861 in 2017, asking the executives to start doing this really, really important, crucial work. You know, some of you may have heard me say before that displacement is the issue that has most really inspired me to want to be doing this job. Because of work that was done prior to my being a council member, the city has begun to realize that displacement is a thing and we have to call it what it is. Prior to 2016, the city didn't even do a displacement risk analysis. Our approach was that supply in itself would mitigate displacement. And we know that's not true. Supply alone does not mitigate displacement. We have to address the impacts of growth when housing is removed through redevelopment. And so, you know, we began doing these displacement risk analyses with our comp plan and with the MHA analysis. And now, because we have that information, we know where displacement's happening, the city is recognizing we have to pass policies to do something about it. I want to thank Mayor Durkan in her executive order proposing changes to the housing levy policies for her support for a community preference policy in response to the 2017 Resolution 3186 passed by the Council in 2017. I look forward to working with Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda when she brings this forward for a vote this spring. This kind of policy will be useful for our nonprofit developers, but nevertheless, we desperately need a tool to address the displacement that occurs when for-profit developers build. Displacement is a very, very challenging issue, and we need many, many tools to address it. For this reason, I will this week be sending a separate bill to the Council's introduction and referral calendar to address those instances when existing affordable units in areas having a high risk of displacement are lost to redevelopment. I'm really proud that I work with a council that has a long legislative record of its commitment to address displacement. Back in 2016, the MHA Framework Ordinance, and then again in 2017, in a displacement risk analysis resolution, the council stated its intent to consider a range of strategies to units sufficient to offset the affordable units lost because they're at risk of demolition due to new development. So now it's time to act again. We can talk more about this later. This is the mayor's press conference on her emergency order. I just want to close again with my sincere thanks to the mayor, to the communities in the CID, the Yesler Collaborative that first proposed the strategy, and communities in the central area that are already poised to use this strategy in a really important community-based effort. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Herbold. And I think it points up that this has got to be effort by all of city government, the council, the mayor, departments together, working with community, and a whole range of tools. No one strategy is going to turn the corner on this issue. So that I'm really looking forward to working with Councilmember Herbold, Councilmember Mosqueda, as we move forward on a range of strategies to try to address gentrification and displacement, and to make sure that every corner of the city really is open to everybody, and that we get affordable housing, both low income and middle income housing, in every part of the city. One part of the executive order that I think you'll see that is new is, as we do MHA, the original framing ordinance required, the target was about 50-50, that as you did redevelopment, about 50% would be in lieu payment and 50% would be performance. Performance meaning you built it right on the site. That is out of whack right now, and so we are going to be looking at that carefully. Right now we're seeing the vast majority of it is going to in lieu payments. long-term, that could have a very negative impact on our city, where we would have affordable housing saturated in only certain locations. I want to make sure that people in Seattle, that there's low-income and middle-income housing in every part of the city. So that's one thing we're going to be tracking very carefully to make sure that we really are having every part of the city open to everyone. Any questions for me or for any of the community members or Councilmember Herbold?
Durkan, are you proposing that the legislature raise the real estate excise tax to help pay for some of this affordable housing? Just wanted to clarify what I'm reading here.
There's a number of proposals that are pending in Olympia. I think the one that is the most promising is that there is a bill working its way through that would give existing sales tax swap, so that counties and or local cities could use a portion of those sales tax to fund affordable housing. So it would not result in the increase of taxes. It would just make sure that those taxes get targeted to where they're needed the most and give local governments authority over that.
Got it. So when people are concerned that their taxes may go up to pay for some of these affordable housing units, what's your response to people?
Right now, none of the proposals we have are to raise taxes. In fact, we're looking to Olympia to find ways to lower property taxes, particularly for seniors and low-income individuals. We want to make sure people can stay in place. The real estate excise tax, has been legislation for a period of time. That would affect the sales of certain properties. Usually, I think there's different versions of it. One would only apply to very high-end real estate, over $1 million. And so again, I think that would affect the sales of the high-end properties, and then that money could be used to address the need for low-income and middle-income housing.
I'm curious how you are squaring the community preference program with the MHA program when the council's writing into the MHA legislation commitments to have in lieu funds invested back in the community where they were actually raised.
That's one of the proposals that's going through it, and we're going to make sure that these two things balance together. I've talked to council about that. I think it's another tool to accomplish the same thing, which is if you are going to be pulling money out of a community, you want to make sure that that development actually benefits that community. But you have to be careful and balanced about it, because some of the communities that are most at risk may not have the most development opportunities in those areas like the University District or others. We want to make sure that a fair amount of the money that comes through MHA also develops those communities that are most disadvantaged and have the highest risk of displacement. Dan?
With the community preference policy, is that focused on bringing people back who've already been displaced out of the city or out of their neighborhood? Or is it more focused on trying to keep people who are still there but at risk?
It could be both. And we've got to work with both communities and developers and obviously legal counsel to make sure we do it properly, because there's some restrictions on what we can do under the law. But we want to do both things. We want to make sure that those people who will be displaced by the redevelopment have a way to stay in their community, but we also want to have some way to bring community back to where they've been displaced. And working these things together is going to be particularly important. As many of you know, we passed our Promise Opportunity program so that every Seattle public high school student gets the opportunity for free college, and we're going to match that up with jobs. Well, many of those families have been displaced, so those kids are no longer in Seattle. So we want to make sure that we really are benefiting those communities and our neighbors that need it the most, and have been working with the school district and others to say, how do we address this holistically for not only to prevent displacement, but really have almost a right of return for those people who have been pushed out because of economic forces.
Two more questions. Mayor, one thing you mentioned yesterday during your speech was reviewing the entire real estate portfolio for the city. Is there a Fort Lawton, is there somewhere that you could look to for housing?
I think there's a range of things we can do, and I think looking at our real estate portfolio, the city of Seattle owns so much property, and it's managed by multiple different departments, and we're going to take it and actually evaluate it for a whole range of things. Is it good for housing itself? Is there an opportunity to maybe use that to sell air rights over property and use those air rights to develop housing somewhere else? Can we sell that property and buy something that can still do what the taxpayers need for that property, but also have funds left over to add, for housing, commercial affordability, and the like? We've never looked at our real estate portfolio like a major institution would. If you look at major institutions that own the breadth of real estate we have in one of the most expensive markets in America, we have an obligation for taxpayers in this community to say, are we getting the highest and best use, and how do we do it to make sure the public benefits?
Your Honor,
Could you talk a little bit more about the Opportunity Zone plan? Because if I'm reading it right, you're taking advantage of the Trump tax plan to make it happen.
We are. The opportunity zones, and it's going to be a really important process. So the people who don't understand it is under the last Trump tax plan, people who have what are called capital gains, the sale of properties and stocks, can actually shelter those gains from taxes if they invest in a fund that invests in opportunity zones. And you had to go through a process to have that zone declared an opportunity zone under the federal law. And it's mostly those areas that are at high risk of displacement, severely economic deprived, et cetera. We went through that process in Seattle. So Chinatown International District, parts of Beacon Hill, parts of South Seattle are now available for that funding. We are going to be working closely with neighborhoods and community groups to identify what are those projects that we could identify that we could get redeveloped that would help the community and not lead to further gentrification. We don't want big funds just coming in and buying up lands, flipping them, and adding to the problem. And so we are beginning a very long process and quick process, both with the Department of Neighborhoods and Communities, to say, let's all right now develop some projects that we think that could be redeveloped so that we can put together a portfolio for those investment funds to say, here's a project. If you use this project, you could get accelerated permitting, so that we're really using the advantage of that money to develop and help against displacement, not add to it. Thank you very much for coming. The thanks is with the people behind me and people like them in the neighborhoods and communities across this town who every day are working. I'm going to sign the executive order now.
And Alex has a handout that was delivered to my committee last year that explains a little bit more about how community preference policies work.
All right, it's official executive order. Executive order.